It was the third hour, 9 o'clock in the morning, when history seemed to hold its breath. The sun had already risen high enough to cast sharp shadows across the rugged landscape, yet there was a strange stillness in the air, as if creation itself sensed that this was no ordinary day. The timing is significant. Morning, often associated with beginnings and hope, now marked the unfolding of suffering. At the very hour when daily life would normally begin in earnest, mark its opening, voices rising, routines continuing. An event of eternal consequence was taking place. This was not merely another execution carried out by Roman authority. This was an appointed hour, foreseen and purposeful, a moment toward which prophecy and expectation had long been moving. The place was Golgotha, the place of the skull, a barren hill outside the walls of Jerusalem. Its rocky surface and grim reputation made it a fitting site for public crucifixions. Here, justice as defined by empire was displayed without mercy. Golgotha was a place meant to intimidate and silence dissent, a symbol of Rome's absolute power. Yet on this particular morning, the hill became something far greater than an execution site. It became the stage upon which divine love would confront human cruelty. The harshness of the terrain mirrored the brutality of what was happening there, but it would also become sacred ground in the memory of believers, a place where despair and redemption intersected. At the center stood Jesus, nailed to a wooden cross, suspended between heaven and earth. He was crucified between two criminals, counted among the guilty, though declared innocent by many who examined him. The image is striking and deeply symbolic. The Savior placed in the middle of sinners, sharing their fate, exposed to the same agony and shame. His body, already weakened from scourging, now bore the weight of nails driven through flesh and bone. Each breath required unbearable effort, pushing against pain that surged through every nerve. The crowd looked on, some mocking, some indifferent, some grieving, while the soldiers carried out their duty with practiced detachment. Above him hung the charge that justified his death in political terms, yet beneath it unfolded a reality far beyond human accusation. The atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Though the sky remained bright, the emotional weight of the moment pressed heavily on those present. Fear mingled with curiosity. Hatred stood beside sorrow. The disciples who dared to remain nearby felt confusion and shattered hope. The religious leaders believed they had secured victory. The passers-by saw only another condemned man. Yet in the unseen realm, something immeasurably profound was occurring. The silence of Jesus, his refusal to curse or retaliate, spoke louder than any protest. Instead of condemnation, he offered forgiveness. Instead of resistance, he embraced the suffering laid upon him. This hour on Golgotha marked the beginning of the ultimate act of sacrificial love. It was not a tragic accident, nor a failed mission. It was the deliberate opening of a redemptive plan. The cross stood as an instrument of shame, but it would become the symbol of salvation. At 9 in the morning, under the ordinary light of day, the extraordinary work of reconciliation began. What appeared to be defeat was in truth the first movement of victory. Golgotha was not merely the site of death, it was the threshold of redemption. As the morning advanced, the suffering intensified. The body of Chúa Giêsu, already torn by scourging and crowned with thorns, now hung exposed beneath the relentless sun. His back, lacerated and raw, pressed against the rough wood of the cross. Nails pierced his hands and feet, sending waves of agony through his nerves with every slight movement. Crucifixion was designed not merely to kill, but to exhaust, to suffocate, and to humiliate. Each breath required him to push against the nails that held him in place, lifting his broken body just enough to draw in air before collapsing again in pain. The torment was relentless, methodical, and public. Yet amid this physical devastation, something even more powerful was taking place. There were no cries of rage, no pleas for vengeance, no curses hurled at those responsible. In a moment when anger would have seemed justified, he remained silent. The silence was not weakness, it was restraint. It was strength under control. Those who passed by mocked him, challenging him to save himself if he truly possessed divine power. Religious leaders sneered, believing this spectacle confirmed their accusations. Soldiers gambled for his garments at the foot of the cross, indifferent to the life slipping away above them. Hatred hung thick in the air, and yet from the cross came words that defied human instinct, a prayer for forgiveness. He asked the Father to forgive those who crucified him, acknowledging their ignorance even as they carried out their cruelty. In that prayer, love pierced through hostility. Mercy rose where judgment might have fallen. It was not merely an expression of compassion, it was a declaration of purpose. His suffering was not an accident inflicted upon him beyond control. It was a sacrifice embraced willingly. This voluntary nature of his suffering gives the moment its deepest meaning. He had spoken of this hour before, predicting betrayal, condemnation, and death. He could have resisted arrest, called down power beyond human comprehension, or walked away from the path that led to Golgotha. Instead, he remained. The cross was not forced upon an unwilling victim. It was accepted by one who understood its necessity. His endurance during those first 3 hours revealed a love that chose pain for the sake of others. Between the 2 criminals crucified beside him, the symbolism was unmistakable. He shared in the fate of sinners, though innocent. One criminal joined the mockery, the other, recognizing something extraordinary, asked to be remembered. Even in agony, Jesus responded with assurance and hope. In that exchange, the cross became more than an instrument of death. It became a doorway. Forgiveness was not abstract theology. It was unfolding in real time. Thus, the first 3 hours were marked not only by physical torment, but by moral and spiritual triumph. The silence spoke of obedience, the prayer spoke of mercy, the endurance spoke of love. In a world accustomed to retaliation, he embodied reconciliation. In a culture shaped by honor and shame, he absorbed humiliation without surrendering dignity. The brutality of the scene could not extinguish the compassion radiating from the cross. Instead, it illuminated the depth of a sacrifice chosen freely, a love that refused to retaliate, and a purpose that extended far beyond the suffering of the moment. Then came the 6th hour, 12 o'clock at midday. The sun, which had shone relentlessly throughout the morning, suddenly failed. An unnatural darkness spread across the land. It was not the gradual dimming of approaching evening, nor the passing shadow of a cloud. It was abrupt, disorienting, and profound. The brilliance of noon gave way to a heavy, oppressive gloom. Conversations faltered, mockery subsided, fear crept into hearts that had moments earlier been bold with contempt. Darkness at midday carried unmistakable weight. In Scripture, light is often associated with life, truth, and divine presence. darkness with judgment and grief. Now, as Jesus hung upon the cross, creation itself seemed to respond. It was as though the natural order recoiled at the sight before it. The sky, once clear, now bore witness in silence. The earth beneath the cross felt less stable, charged with tension. Nature was not indifferent, it reacted. This darkness signaled that something far greater than a Roman execution was unfolding. The suffering of one man, however, innocent, would not normally eclipse the sun. But this death was no ordinary death. It was cosmic in scope. The one hanging on the cross was not merely a teacher or prophet. He was central to the divine plan of redemption. The darkness symbolized the weight of sin, the gravity of judgment, and the cost of reconciliation. It was as though the sorrow of humanity and the holiness of God converged in that moment. For 3 hours the land remained under this shadow. Time seemed suspended. The earlier noise of the crowd diminished into uneasy quiet. The religious leaders, so confident before, could not explain what was happening. The soldiers, hardened by countless executions, sensed that this one was different. Even those who had come merely to watch found themselves unsettled. The darkness forced reflection. It stripped away distraction and exposed the seriousness of the hour. In this enveloping gloom, the cross stood silhouetted against a dim sky, a stark reminder that what appeared as defeat was, in truth, the turning point of history. The darkness did not signify the triumph of evil. It underscored the magnitude of the sacrifice being made. It announced that heaven and earth were engaged in a moment of eternal consequence. This was not simply the death of a righteous man. It was a redemptive event, a decisive act in which the barrier between God and humanity was being addressed. The darkness testified that the cross reached beyond the physical realm. It touched the spiritual fabric of existence. The sorrow was real, the suffering undeniable, but beneath it all lay purpose. Thus, the 6th hour marked a transition. The silence of endurance gave way to the solemn witness of creation itself. Noon became midnight. Light yielded to shadow. Yet within that shadow, redemption was advancing. The darkness was not the end of the story. It was the prelude to revelation. As the darkness lingered over the land, the weight of the moment deepened. 3 hours had passed under that unnatural shadow. Then, at the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the stillness was broken. From the cross came a final cry. It was not the cry of defeat, nor the fading murmur of despair, but a declaration. With deliberate clarity, Jesus proclaimed, "It is finished." These words were not a surrender to death. They were an announcement of completion. The suffering had reached its appointed end. The mission that began long before Golgotha had now come to its decisive fulfillment. Every prophecy pointing toward this hour, every symbol in sacrifice and temple ritual, every promise of redemption woven through generations, had converged upon this single moment. "It is finished" did not mean that life had failed. It meant that the work of atonement had been accomplished. After speaking, he yielded his spirit. The final breath was not torn from him by force, it was given. Even in death, there was intentionality. The one who had endured betrayal, mockery, scourging, and crucifixion now entered death itself by choice. For those watching, it appeared to be the end. The body grew still, the head bowed, silence followed. But the earth did not remain still. Almost immediately, the ground began to tremble. A violent earthquake shook the region. Rocks split apart. The very foundation beneath Golgotha seemed to convulse. What had been hidden in spiritual reality now erupted into physical expression. Creation responded not only with darkness, but with upheaval. It was as if the world itself reacted to the significance of what had just occurred. At that same moment within the temple in Jerusalem, something extraordinary took place. The heavy veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary was torn in two, from top to bottom. This curtain symbolized the barrier between a holy God and sinful humanity. Only the high priest could enter beyond it, and only once a year, carrying sacrificial blood for atonement. Its tearing was no minor detail, it signified access. What had once been restricted was now opened. The separation had been addressed. The direction of the tear from top to bottom suggested divine action. Humanity did not remove the barrier. God did. Through the sacrifice of Jesus, the way into the presence of God was made available. No longer would access depend on repeated sacrifices or ritual mediation. The cross had fulfilled what the temple foreshadowed. 6 hours had passed since 9 in the morning, 6 hours that redefined eternity. What began as an execution concluded as redemption accomplished. To many observers, it looked like tragedy. To heaven, it was victory secured. The cross stood no longer as a symbol of humiliation alone, but as the bridge between broken humanity and divine holiness. The 9th hour marked the climax. The darkness lifted, the trembling subsided. The body was taken down and laid in a tomb. Yet the echo of those words, "It is finished," remained. Something irreversible had taken place. History had pivoted. The cost had been paid. The following day passed in silence, then another. The disciples were scattered, grieving, uncertain. Hope seemed buried behind a sealed tomb. The body of Jesus had been wrapped and placed in a new grave, hewn from stone. A massive rock was rolled across its entrance. Roman guards were stationed to secure it, ensuring that no rumor of theft or deception could arise. From every human perspective, the story had ended. But on the 3rd day, at dawn, the unexpected occurred. The earth trembled once more, not in judgment, but in revelation. The stone that sealed the tomb was rolled away, not to let Jesus out, but to let witnesses in. The grave that had been sealed was now open. The place where his body had been laid was empty. The tomb stood vacant. Those who arrived first were confused, then astonished. Grave clothes remained, but the body was gone. Fear mingled with wonder. Soon the truth began to dawn. He had risen, just as he had promised. Death, which had seemed so final on Golgotha, had not held him. The resurrection was not merely a return to life, it was a transformation of reality. Crucifixion had displayed the depth of suffering love. Resurrection revealed its unstoppable power. The grave, once the ultimate symbol of defeat, became the evidence of victory. The promise spoken before his death was now fulfilled. What had been declared on the cross, "It is finished," was validated by an empty tomb. This event altered the meaning of death itself. No longer the final word, death was exposed as temporary, conquered. The resurrection affirmed that the sacrifice had been accepted, that redemption was effective, that reconciliation was real. Fear began to give way to boldness. Sorrow transformed into proclamation. Those who had hidden behind locked doors would soon stand publicly, declaring that Jesus was alive. The implications extended far beyond that morning. If death could not hold him, then despair could not hold humanity. If the tomb could not confine him, then hope could not be extinguished. The resurrection announced that love is stronger than hatred, that life is stronger than death, that light ultimately overcomes darkness. The cross and the empty tomb together form a single story. One without the other would be incomplete. The cross demonstrates the cost of redemption. The resurrection displays its success. Through both, the path to God stands open, and the promise of new life is secured. Thus, what began at 9 in the morning on Golgotha culminated not in silence, but in triumph. The stone was rolled away. The grave was empty. The risen Christ stood as living proof that sacrifice was not wasted and that love had prevailed. Death had been confronted and defeated. Hope had not merely survived, it had risen, and the world would never be the same. From the appointed hour on Golgotha to the dawn of the empty tomb, the story unfolds as more than history. It stands as a message that speaks across centuries. The cross and the resurrection together declare a truth that confronts every human heart. Love is greater than suffering. On that hill outside Jerusalem, pain reached its visible extreme. Betrayal, injustice, humiliation, and physical agony converged in one brutal display. Yet suffering did not have the final word. Instead, love endured through it. The silence under accusation, the prayer of forgiveness spoken in agony, the willingness to remain on the cross. These reveal a love that does not retreat when confronted with pain. It absorbs it, it transforms it, it redeems it. The message is clear. Suffering may wound, but it cannot overpower sacrificial love. Forgiveness, too, stands at the center of this story. In a world driven by retaliation and pride, the cross offers a radically different response. Rather than answer hatred with hatred, Jesus answered it with mercy. Forgiveness proved stronger than revenge. It broke the cycle of violence not by escalating it, but by absorbing it. The tearing of the temple veil symbolized not only access to God, but reconciliation made possible. Humanity's failure was met not with abandonment, but with invitation. The path was opened, and death, so feared, so final in human experience, was exposed as temporary. The empty tomb proclaims that the grave is not the ultimate conclusion of the human story. When Jesus rose, he did not merely return to life, he redefined it. Resurrection reframes despair. It tells every grieving heart that darkness does not last forever. The stone that sealed hope can be rolled away. The night that feels endless can give way to dawn. Death itself has boundaries when confronted by divine power. This is why the crucifixion does not end in mourning alone. It leads to victory. What appeared to be defeat became triumph. What seemed like loss became gain. The cross and resurrection together proclaim that no suffering is beyond redemption, no failure beyond forgiveness, no grave beyond God's reach. Hope can rise again, even when all appears lost. For humanity today, this message remains urgent. In a world marked by conflict, injustice, fear, and uncertainty, the events of Golgotha and the empty tomb offer something unshakable. Love is stronger than hatred. Forgiveness is stronger than bitterness. Life is stronger than death. And hope, once awakened, cannot easily be extinguished. If this message has spoken to your heart, if it has stirred reflection, comforted pain, or reignited hope, consider continuing this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel and follow along as we explore more profound lessons from Scripture, uncovering truths that inspire faith, courage, and transformation. Your support not only helps spread this message further, but also strengthens a community seeking light in a world that often feels dark. The story of the cross does not conclude in silence, and neither should its message. Let hope rise, let love lead, and let the victory of resurrection shape the way we live today and tomorrow.